There are places in this world where the barrier between the living and the dead is not a wall, but a veil. It is a thin, gossamer curtain that flutters with the breath of those who have passed on, yet refuse to leave. These locations do not merely house history. They trap it. They record the emotions, the tragedies, and the traumas of the past into the very bedrock upon which they stand. Welcome to Nocturnal Ledger. Tonight, we journey into the heart of the Colorado Rockies, to a majestic white palace that stands in stark contrast to the rugged, unforgiving wilderness surrounding it. This is a story documented in historical records, police logs, and the trembling testimonies of thousands of witnesses. This is the true, terrifying reality of the Stanley Hotel. To understand the haunting, one must first understand the isolation. Estes Park, Colorado, is a place of breathtaking beauty. But in the early 20th century, it was a place of silence. A place where the wind howled through the valleys with a voice that sounded frighteningly human. In 1903, Freeland Oscar Stanley, a wealthy inventor and co-founder of the Stanley Motor Carriage Company, arrived in this valley. He was a man marked by death. Stricken with tuberculosis, doctors had given him months to live. They told him to seek the dry, thin air of the Rockies as a final comfort before the inevitable end. But the mountains did not kill F.O. Stanley. They revitalized him. Grateful for his miraculous recovery and entranced by the valley's splendor, Stanley decided to build a monument to luxury in the middle of the wild. Construction began in 1907, and by 1909, the Stanley Hotel opened its doors. It was a marvel of the Edwardian era, boasting electricity, telephones, and ensuite bathrooms. Luxuries that were unheard of in such a remote location. It was designed to cater to the wealthy elite of the East Coast, a summer resort where the rich could play in the shadow of the mountains. But as the years turned into decades, the laughter of the Gilded Age faded, and something else began to fill the silence of those long, carpeted corridors. The Stanley Hotel is perhaps most famous for being the muse that terrified Stephen King into writing his masterpiece, The Shining. But it is crucial to distinguish fiction from reality, because the true stories of the Stanley are far more unsettling than any novel. Now, King's experience in 1974 was merely a symptom of the hotel's power, not the cause. He and his wife checked in just as the hotel was closing for the winter. They were the only guests in the massive, creaking structure. They stayed in room 217. That night, King wandered the empty halls, listening to the wind batter the walls, feeling the oppressive weight of the history around him. He reported having a nightmare so vivid, so visceral, that he woke up sweating and gasping for air. A dream of his 3-year-old son being chased through the corridors by a fire hose. He stepped out onto the balcony of room 217 to smoke a cigarette and calm his nerves. And by the time the cigarette was extinguished, the skeleton of The Shining was formed. However, deck room 217 does not need Stephen King to make it terrifying. Its reputation began 60 years prior with a woman named Elizabeth Wilson. Elizabeth was the head housekeeper during the hotel's early years. On June 25, 1911, a severe storm had knocked out power to the hotel. As the staff scrambled to light the acetylene gas lamps in the rooms, a gas leak began to fill room 217. Unaware of the danger, Elizabeth entered the room with a lit candle. The explosion was catastrophic. It blew the floor out from under her, dropping her into the McGregor room below. It destroyed the west wing of the hotel and injured several staff members. Miraculously, Elizabeth Wilson survived. She suffered broken ankles and severe trauma, but she recovered and, displaying the stoic dedication of her era, returned to work at the Stanley until her death in the 1950s. But according to the staff and guests who have stayed in room 217 since, Elizabeth never truly checked out. Documented reports from guests in room 217 describe a very specific, intelligent haunting. This is not a residual loop of energy. This is an interaction. Single men who stay in the room often report waking up to find their belongings packed. Suitcases are organized. Clothes are folded neatly at the foot of the bed, and shoes are lined up by the door. It is as if Elizabeth, maintaining her role as head housekeeper, is politely suggesting that they leave. However, her interactions with unmarried couples are far less polite. Numerous couples have reported feeling a freezing cold force wedge itself between them in the bed. Some have woken up to find themselves physically pushed to the edge of the mattress. There is a sense of old-fashioned morality at play, a disapproval of impropriety that has survived death. The terror here is not in jump scares, but in the violation of intimacy. The realization that you are being watched, judged, and physically manipulated by a woman who died over half a century ago. One particularly chilling testimony comes from a businessman who stayed in room 217 in the late 1990s. He was a skeptic, a man of numbers and logic who scoffed at the ghost stories. He recounted that after a long day of meetings, he returned to his room, placed his shoes by the wardrobe, and went to sleep. In the dead of night, he was awoken by a rhythmic thudding sound. Thud, silence, thud, silence. He lay frozen, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. At the foot of his bed, he saw his shoes. They were being lifted into the air by unseen hands and dropped onto the floor, one by one. He didn't flee. He was paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what he was witnessing. The next morning, he checked out, refusing to ever set foot in the hotel again. But Elizabeth Wilson is just one resident in a crowded house of spirits. If you walk down the grand staircase and enter the music room, you may encounter the matriarch of the hotel herself, Flora Stanley. Flora was a woman of culture and grace, and she loved her Steinway piano. It was her pride and joy. She would entertain guests for hours, filling the lobby with classical melodies. Since her passing in 1939, that music has not stopped. There are hundreds of reports from the front desk staff and night security guards. In the dead of winter, when the snow is piled high against the windows and the hotel is nearly empty, the sound of piano music drifts from the music room. It is not a recording. It is the distinct percussive sound of hammers hitting strings. Witnesses describe the melody as faint but unmistakable. When they approach the music room to investigate, the music stops abruptly. The room is empty. The piano lid is closed. But if they place a hand on the wood of the piano, it is warm, and the strings inside are still vibrating, humming with the resonance of a song just finished. This phenomenon has been investigated by numerous paranormal teams. During one investigation, audio equipment recorded a melody that no one in the room could hear with their naked ears. And when played back, it was a complex classical piece, played with the skill and nuance of a trained pianist. The skeptics argue it is the wind or the settling of the building. But wind does not play Beethoven with perfect tempo, while Flora and Elizabeth represent the more benign, perhaps even protective spirits of the Stanley. There are darker corners of the hotel where the energy is heavy, oppressive, and predatory. We must turn our attention to the fourth floor. Originally, the fourth floor was the attic. It was a cavernous, unfinished space where the servants, the nannies, and the children of the guests stayed. It was hot in the summer, freezing in the winter, and cramped. Today, it is a long, narrow hallway, lined with guest rooms, and it is widely considered the most active site in the entire hotel. And the atmosphere on the fourth floor is noticeably different. The air is thicker. The temperature fluctuates wildly, dropping 20 degrees in the span of a few feet. It is here that the laughter of children is heard most frequently. Room 418 is the epicenter of this activity. Cleaning staff have reported this room as a source of constant distress. Maids will clean the room, make the bed, and leave, locking the door behind them. Minutes later, sounds of jumping and playing can be heard from the hallway. When they unlock the door and re-enter, the bed is stripped. Sheets are tossed into the corner, pillows are scattered, and there are small, child-sized indentations on the mattress. This is not a one-time occurrence. It is a pattern that is repeated for decades. Guests who stay in room 418 often complain of excessive noise from the room above them, the sound of furniture dragging and children running. The terror sets in when they are informed that there is no room above 418. There is only the roof and the cold, empty sky of the Rockies. One documented case involves a family who stayed in the room in the early 2000s. They had 2 young children of their own. During the night, the parents were awoken by their children giggling and talking to someone in the corner of the room. When the father turned on the lamp, the corner was empty. He asked his daughter who she was talking to. She pointed a small finger at the empty space and said, "The little boy in the blue suit. He wants to play." The parents, terrified, packed their bags and then left in the middle of the night. But the children are not the only things roaming the fourth floor. There is a presence known as Lord Dunraven. The Earl of Dunraven was an Irish nobleman who owned much of the land in Estes Park before F.O. Stanley arrived. He was not a well-liked man. He was known for his arrogance, his greed, and his unsavory behavior toward women. Even in death, it seems, his character has not improved. Lord Dunraven haunts room 401. This room is situated near the elevator and is known for a heavy, masculine energy. Unlike the playful children or the diligent Elizabeth, the presence in 401 is aggressive. Female guests have reported the sensation of having their hair stroked or their shoulders touched when no one is there. Some have felt a hand slide up their leg while they are sleeping. There is a distinct smell that accompanies these manifestations, the scent of stale pipe tobacco and bay rum cologne, odors that have no place in a modern, non-smoking hotel. One particularly harrowing account comes from a woman who was attending a conference at the hotel. She was staying alone in room 401. She reported feeling uneasy from the moment she walked in, describing the sensation of being watched by eyes that were hidden in the shadows of the closet. That night, she woke up unable to move. She was pinned to the bed, not by sleep paralysis, but by a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She could feel hot breath against her ear and heard a low, guttural growl. She struggled, gasping for air, until the weight suddenly lifted. She fled the room in her pajamas, running down to the lobby, hysterical, when security checked the room, It was empty. The windows were locked, but the smell of pipe tobacco hung heavy in the air. The terror of the Stanley Hotel is not confined to the guest rooms. It permeates the very foundation of the property. The concert hall, a separate building on the grounds, is another hotbed of paranormal activity. This was a place of celebration, where the Stanleys would host grand performances. But beneath the stage, in the basement, lurks a darker energy. There is a spirit here known as Paul. In life, Paul was a dedicated employee who monitored the curfew of the staff and guests. In death, he is the eternal enforcer. Construction workers and paranormal investigators exploring the basement of the concert hall have reported hearing a disembodied voice shout, "Get out!" It is a command, barked with authority. And during a televised investigation by the team from Ghost Hunters, the TAPS team, they set up audio recorders in the basement. They captured one of the clearest electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, in paranormal history. In the silence of the basement, a voice clearly rasps, "Hello?" followed by the sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden floorboards above them. Floorboards that they knew were empty. But perhaps the most tragic figure in the concert hall is a homeless woman named Lucy. According to local lore, Lucy was a runaway who sought shelter in the basement of the concert hall during a harsh winter in the mid-20th century. She froze to death in the sub-zero temperatures, alone and forgotten. Today, investigators often try to communicate with her. They leave candy or small toys as trigger objects, while there are numerous recordings of a faint female voice humming a sorrowful tune. The tragedy of Lucy reminds us that ghosts are not just monsters. They are the echoes of human suffering. They are the imprints of lives cut short, trapped in the place where their journey ended. We must also consider the geological reality of the Stanley Hotel. Why is this location so active? Why do the spirits remain here with such clarity and power? Paranormal researchers often point to the stone tape theory. The idea is that certain minerals, particularly quartz and limestone, can act as a recording medium, storing the emotional energy of events like a magnetic tape. The Stanley Hotel sits on a foundation of solid granite, which has a high quartz content. The entire mountain range is essentially a massive battery. When you combine this geological potency with the high emotional events that have occurred here, the joy of the summer balls, the trauma of the explosion in room 217, the isolation of the long winters, and the deaths that inevitably occur in a hotel operating for over a century, you create a perfect storm for supernatural activity. The hotel is not just a building, it is a vessel. It absorbs the energy of everyone who enters it. In recent years, the evidence has only grown. With the advent of smartphones, guests are capturing anomalies that were previously invisible. A photo taken in 2016 went viral, showing the grand staircase. The photographer was taking a picture of the empty lobby, but when he reviewed the image, there was a figure standing at the top of the stairs, a woman in a period-appropriate black dress and a child standing beside her. The photographer insisted that there was no one on the stairs when he took the photo. Analysis of the image showed no signs of digital manipulation. It was a glimpse into the past, a momentary tear in the veil. Another guest captured a panoramic photo of the lobby. In the distorted blur of the image, a figure appeared behind a pillar, a translucent gray shape that resembled a man in a cowboy hat. Was this a trick of the light? Or was it one of the ranch hands who worked the land before the hotel was built, still watching over his territory? The psychological impact on the staff who work the night shift cannot be overstated. Imagine walking those long, winding corridors at 3 in the morning. The wind is howling outside, rattling the window panes. The floorboards creak under your feet, but then you hear a creak behind you. You stop. The sound stops. You start walking again, and the footsteps behind you resume. You turn around, and the hallway's empty, but the air is freezing cold, and you can feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. This is the nightly reality for the employees of the Stanley. They do not talk about if the hotel is haunted. They talk about who is active tonight. There's a tunnel that runs beneath the hotel, used by staff to move between buildings during the harsh winters. It is a damp, claustrophobic passage carved out of the rock. Many staff members refuse to use it alone. They report seeing shadow figures darting between the pipes. They hear whispers that seem to come from inside the walls. It is a place where the darkness feels tangible, a heavy blanket that threatens to suffocate you. As we delve deeper into the modern era, the haunting of the Stanley Hotel has evolved. It has become a place where the living seek out the dead, inviting engagement. But one must be careful what they invite. The spirits of the Stanley are not performers in a sideshow. They are complex entities with their own agendas. Consider the story of a paranormal tour group that visited in 2018. They were in the billiards room, a favorite haunt of F.O. Stanley. The guide was explaining how Mr. Stanley loved to play billiards and would often be seen watching games from the corner. One of the guests, a young man, began to mock the story, laughing and challenging the spirit to show himself. Suddenly, a heavy glass ashtray sitting in the center of the table flew across the room and shattered against the wall, inches from the heckler's head. The room went silent. The air grew instantly frigid. It was a violent, physical reminder that the entities here demand respect. The skepticism that surrounds the paranormal is natural. We want to believe that the world is rational, that death is the end, and that the laws of physics are absolute. But the Stanley Hotel stands as a defiance of that rationality. It is a place where the laws of physics seem to bend. How do you explain the piano playing itself? How do you explain the shoes moving on their own? How do you explain the shared hallucinations of hundreds of unrelated people over the span of a century? The skeptics will say it is infrasound, low-frequency sound waves caused by the wind hitting the mountains, that creates feelings of dread and hallucinations. They will say it is the power of suggestion, that people see ghosts because they expect to see ghosts. And perhaps, for some, that is true. But that does not explain the physical evidence. It does not explain the bruises on the woman in room 401. It does not explain the voice on the tape recorder answering a question that hadn't been asked yet. The Stanley Hotel is a puzzle with no solution. It is a grand, beautiful, terrifying labyrinth of memory. When you walk its halls, you are walking through time. You are stepping into the residual energy of 1911, of 1930, of 1974. You are sharing space with Elizabeth Wilson, with Flora Stanley, he with Lord Dunraven, and with the crying children of the 4th floor. So, the next time you find yourself in the Colorado Rockies, looking for a place to rest your head, consider the Stanley. Book a room on the 4th floor. Walk the halls at midnight. Listen to the silence. But do not be surprised if the silence speaks back. Do not be surprised if you wake up to the smell of pipe tobacco or the sound of a party that ended 80 years ago. The hotel was built to accommodate the living, but it has become a sanctuary for the dead. They are the permanent guests, the ones who never checked out. And as the wind screams down from the peaks of the Rocky Mountains, rattling the windows of room 217, one has to wonder, are we the guests watching them, or are they the ones watching us? And this has been a deep dive into the archives of the unexplained. The evidence is there, etched in stone and whispered on tape. The reality of the Stanley Hotel challenges everything we think we know about the boundary between life and death. Sleep well, if you can. This is Nocturnal Ledger, closing the book on another nightmare.